time. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm so excited to welcome you to our Conservation Café, the unpaid toll, the health impacts of data centers. This is such an important issue. Nature Forward, along with many of our partners, has been working to address legislatively as well as educate people on the impacts of data centers in the DC area. Nature Forward is one of the oldest independent environmental organizations in the DC area. We were founded in 1897, formerly known as Audubon Naturalist Society. One of our biggest goals at the time was to save birds from becoming hats for women. And since then, we have grown a lot in recognizing how nature needs everyone. And there are so many different ways that nature impacts us, from air pollution that impacts our health, to moving towards more public transit to reduce greenhouse gases. And data centers, while we know that they are an important advancement for where we live today, many of us use AI whether we want to or not. We need to see more regulation to protect us from the land impacts, the water impacts, the energy impacts, especially in transitioning to renewable energy. And what we're going to talk about today with Dr. Ren, the health impacts of data centers. And something that is very, very exciting to me. For those who don't know, I'm actually a registered nurse originally. So the intersection on the environment and our health is something that is near and dear to my heart, and something that Nature Forward and many of our partners have tried to educate people on, but we've never had the impacts of air pollution from data centers quantified. And so I was very excited when Dr. Ren, along with his co-authors, released this paper that talked about modeling the impacts of data centers on our health and what that looks like financially, what it looks like for us physically, and where these impacts are coming from. I think we should move to the next slide, Denise. So for today's agenda, we're in the welcome part. Then we're going to transition over to Dr. Ren for his presentation. After Dr. Ren speaks, we will have some updates because for Virginia, we just completed our General Assembly session and bills are passed or they did not pass and they're now on their way to the governor's desk. And for Maryland, we are in the middle of our General Assembly there. So our conservation advocates in Maryland and Virginia will give some updates. And then we will have time for questions. And I'm so excited because I know many of you have all types of knowledge on data centers, and we're all very excited to hear about this topic. Next slide, please, Denise. For today in this webinar format, if you have questions, you are welcome to add them to the chat or to the Q&A. After Dr. Ren gives his presentation, we will share those questions with him so that he can answer them to the best of his knowledge, which is quite deep. So please add your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Also follow Nature Forward. We're now on Blue Sky instead of Twitter or X, as well as Instagram and Facebook. Go Nature Forward is our handle, and hashtag Conservation Café. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Ren. He is an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of California, Riverside. His research strives to build socially and environmentally responsible computing with a broad emphasis on AI, sustainability, and public health. His work has influenced AI policies adopted by international organizations and governments such as the United Nations, UNESCO, WHO, and the Government of Canada, and driven industry innovations such as the first real-time water footprint reporting tool for computing. He is a recipient of the NSF CAREER Award in 2015 and several paper awards, including at ACME Energy and at IEEE ICC. He earned his Ph.D. from the University of California, Los Angeles. And I would say the excitement for this talk is so big that we have just under 200 people from just under 20 different states around the United States. So welcome, Dr. Ren.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for the great introduction. So today I'm very happy to share some of our recent research on quantifying the public health impacts of data centers. So I will just start my talk now. So as we all know, we've seen a dramatic increase of AI adoption. So this as exemplified by the success of large language models, and these models are ranging from a few billion parameters to hundreds of billion parameters, and also this AI not only includes this large language model, but also many other type of models, such as image generation models, and also those classification models as well. So as this model becoming more and more powerful, their size also increases, and they require more computing servers and GPU cards. And to house this data center, we need to house this AI model, we need to build more and more data centers. And as a result, the energy consumption by AI data centers is also rising up substantially. So if you look at the recent Lawrence Berkeley National Lab report, it shows that in 2023, the U.S. data center was taking up about 4.4% of the national electricity consumption. But in 2028, just a few years down the road, this energy consumption is projected to increase to more than 6% up to 12% of the national electricity demand. And this is not really evenly distributed. If you look at certain regions like Virginia, the energy demand is by data centers is already more than 1/3 of the state's electricity consumption. And just to give you some sense of how much energy training this large language model consumes. So based on the disclosure by Meta, training their Llama 3.1 with 405 billion parameter model consumes about 21,000 megawatt hour energy. And this is just for the GPU cards. We're not considering the server overhead or data center cooling overhead. And this amount of energy is already equivalent to about 25,000 households annual electricity consumption in the US. And this is just for training part. If you're factoring the inference, each inference doesn't use that much energy, but in aggregate, due to the large volume of requests, the overall inference energy could be even higher than this training part. So just like when we make any decisions, we want to make sure our benefit is outweighing the cost. And this is the classic rational decision theory in economics or in game theory. So in terms of the AI data centers, we should do the same thing. We want to make sure the benefit that this AI brings to us will be outweighing the cost it brings to the society. So I'm going to look at the cost part, especially look at the energy. So clearly, when data center operators pay for the use the energy, they have to pay for the bills. But these bills is not only paid by the data center operators. Instead, building these additional infrastructures and such as transmission lines, power generators, will have a big societal cost as well. And this societal cost would be this bill will be footed by the residents in terms of their utility rate spikes. And in addition, there are also carbon emission that has a long-term climate change. And just to give you some quick snapshot of the AI's carbon emission. So in general, we classify the carbon emission into three different scopes. Scope one is the direct carbon emission for mostly backup generators. But in data center case, the backup generator is carbon emission is almost zero. And scope two is the electricity consumption. And because even though we have a lot of renewables such as solar and wind energy coming into the power grid, the grid is mostly still relying on coal and fossil fuels and natural gas. And even in 2050, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the coal consumption for electricity generation will still be roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of what we are consuming today. And for scope three is the supply chain carbon emission. So anything related to the server manufacturing, transportation, and recycling will be considered as a scope three carbon emission. And for these tech companies, scope two and scope three are the major part. And if they apply some market-based mechanism to offset their scope two carbon emission, then the scope three become more dominant. And additionally, when we use energy to power the AI servers, there is also a huge amount of heat generated associated with the energy. And to cool down the data center facilities, the most efficient way is just use water evaporation. And this picture shows Google's cooling tower system. So you can see at the right side, there's servers, and the servers between the server and the heat exchanger is a closed loop. Whether we're using air or using liquid, there's no water loss or water consumption. But between the heat exchanger and the cooling tower, shown in the green parts, you can see it's an open loop. And this open loop is constantly evaporating water to the sky to dissipate the heat from the facility to the outside environment. And importantly, according to Google's disclosure, about 80 to 90% of the water consumption is potable water in the US. And another type of cooling system is using outside air, or sometimes we call it free natural cooling. But this type of cooling still requires water evaporation during the summer days. And because the outside air, if it's too hot, we have to pre-cool it, and water evaporation is the most efficient way. So in general, oh, by the way, the water consumption is a technical term. It just means the difference between water withdrawal and water discharge. So in the data center context, that means the water gets evaporated, and the water evaporation is the water consumption. And for some beverage companies, the water put into those bottles are considered as water consumption. So when we take a shower, we withdraw a lot of water, but most of the water just goes straight into the sewage system, and that's water discharge. So when we take shower, we're not really consuming water by definition. So some of the tech companies can consume many billions of liters water each year just for their direct data center cooling. And this is mostly driven by the expansion of AI products and services as acknowledged by their sustainability reports. So one company consumed 24 billion liters of water in 2023, and this amount of water just roughly the same as a direct water consumption of a major beverage company. And if you look at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab prediction, in 2028, the water consumption by the US data centers will be 2 to 4 times the 2023 level. On top of this is direct water consumption. We also have indirect water consumption associated with the electricity generation. So let's look at this picture. There are 2 cooling towers to generate nuclear power plants, to generate nuclear power at the top. And at the bottom, there's a data center. And this is one of the tech companies' data center in Pennsylvania. So essentially, the water consumption just it has to be consumed 24/7 to power the data center facilities. And this is considered as a scope 2 water consumption. So not all the companies are reporting scope 2 water, and a few of them are reporting the scope 2 water consumption. Meta is one of the examples. And actually the scope 1, scope 2 water together is the true water cost of data centers according to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab report. So there's been some misinformation about AI's water consumption in the last couple of weeks, and they say that the study on water AI's water consumption is from those anti-AI crowd and make up something. But I would say this is just purely misinformation because they are comparing the AI's water to some hamburgers water. And when we talk about hamburgers water, that's really the life cycle water consumption, including the rainwater, which is called green water, contained in the soil to grow the crops, to feed the cattle, then to make the patties. So it's really the supply chain for making the hamburgers. But in the data center context, the number that we show in our research is just for the operational water. So that's not the total life cycle, and it's blue water. That's the fresh water people can use directly. So it's not really the right type of comparison. I think someone just spreading this sort of misinformation online to for their own benefits. So additionally, there's a scope 3 water consumption. And actually, this is a major part as well. So Apple says about 99% of its overall water footprint is from the supply chain. So but we don't have a lot of detailed information about how much water is for the supply chain. So whenever we do the AI water calculation, we're not considering the scope 3 water. So these are some of the known cost of energy, like the energy bill, the utility rate increase for the residents, and the carbon emission, water consumption. But one of the things that are also important, but has not been talked a lot about, is the public health impact. So why is that? If you look at the recent executive order 14141 and signed by President Biden before they left office, by the way, this executive order has not been revoked yet as of today. So this executive order mentioned public health several times, and in particular, it included the phrase cancer risk. So why is there's a connection between the cancer risk and the AI data centers? And this is due to the air pollution. And I think this is, to my knowledge, this is the first time the public health risk, especially in terms of the cancer risk, is recognized by some official government documents. So let's dig into the air pollution part of the AI computing. So similar to the carbon emission, we also have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is for the backup generators, but unlike the backup generators for carbon emission, when we ran the backup generators, the nitrogen dioxide emission rate is more than 300 times as much as the natural gas power plant. So the scope one emission is not zero. It's not like the carbon emission part, which can be ignored. So the scope 2 is the emission air pollutant emission associated with the electricity consumption. And due to the high energy consumption of data centers, the scope 2 emission is also significant. And the last part is the scope 3 associated with the supply chain. So unfortunately, there's not much information. And we show one manufacturer facility in Phoenix, Arizona. So we did some study and shows that the public health burden will be roughly $25 to $37 million per year. And if you relocate the same facility to Ohio, the public health impact will be increasing to $92 to $146 million per year. So we'll explain the details of our methodology, but at this point, these are the three different scopes of the AI computing's air pollutant emission. And in our research, we mainly focus on scope 1 and scope 2. And these air pollutants include particulate matter 2.5. Those are really fine particulates with a diameter of 2.5 micrometers or even less. And sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and volatile organic compounds. So let me give you some quick background on on these air pollutants. These air pollutants are causally and directly connected to many health outcomes, such as asthma, lung cancer, heart attack, and even premature death. And some studies from Harvard published in Science showed that approximately 460,000 people died of PM 2.5 just from the coal power plants in the US from 1999 to 2019. And globally, roughly 8 million people died of the air pollution, mainly due to the PM 2.5. So in general, this air pollutants is what is along with the high blood pressure, smoking, and high blood sugar is one of the leading uh, uh, risk risk factors for the global health burden across all the social demographic index. And so even though the US generally has a much better air quality than many other countries, still the power plants based on the fossil fuel is a leading source of air pollution. And actually, the fossil fuel-based power plants is the largest stationary source of air pollutant in the U.S. So, and importantly, this PM 2.5 is a non-threshold type of air pollutant, which means there's no safe level of air pollutants. So the WHO recommended an annual PM 2.5 average level at 5 microgram per cubic meters, and the recently tightened US standard is about 9 micrograms per cubic meters. So some other countries have an even higher threshold. So, but in any case, this doesn't mean meeting the national standard doesn't mean we are having healthy air. And some people, before the study, I myself didn't know that these air pollutants can travel a long distance. Actually, this is what the science is telling us. So these air pollutants can travel hundreds of miles depending on the wind direction and wind speed. So essentially, this is what the EPA called cross-state air pollutant dispersion. So the but due to the lack of knowledge and understanding, the air pollutants that people see or people experience are typically not associated with the sources many miles away. But in reality, the air pollutants we breathe in actually are coming from those sources, and some of them are located really far away. So in our research, we try to quantify the air pollutants coming or attributed to data centers and how they will be affecting people's health across different regions. So in general, our methodology has three different steps. First, we need to quantify the amount of emission at the source, including the backup generators and also the power plant to supply the power to the data centers. We're not considering the supply chain in our research. And the second stage is to model the air pollutant dispersion from the source where the pollutant will be going. And the last stage is to estimate the health impact in terms of like premature mortality, asthma, heart attack. And then we're going to assign a dollar value for each of the health outcomes to give you the overall indicator of the health burden. So we use the US EPA tool called COBRA, Co-Benefit Risk and Assessment Health Impacts Screening and Mapping tool. It's a very easy to use and convenient tool that integrates the model of air pollutant dispersion and health outcome assessment. And it also provides county level assessment for the health outcomes and also the economic cost. So although this is a screening tool, it's not used and it shouldn't be used for street level analysis because it's only for county level. It's a very valuable and easy to use tool based on peer-reviewed methodology, and it has been widely used for wide area health impact analysis. It provides quantitative insights for state and local policymakers. So, for example, the DOE used the COBRA to analyze the health impact in terms of the EV policies, and some research study and actually hundreds of research study are using COBRA to analyze the health benefit or health outcomes associated with a certain sector. So the US EPA even announced what they call health benefits per kilowatt hour energy efficiency and renewable energy. So essentially, this is the public health price for electricity usage. And the EPA has a web page to show the health price for different regions, and the highest to the lowest ratio is more than a factor of 8, which means across different regions, there's a huge variation in terms of the health price for the same amount of energy consumption. So let's come to our result. We first look at the backup generators, which is a scope 1 air pollutant emission for data centers. We look at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality website, which lists the air quality permits for all the data centers in Virginia. So we assume 10% of the emissions are 10% of the permitted emissions are the actual emissions, and which I think is a fairly reasonable assumption because if you look at the report by I think JAILA last year, and JAILA said that roughly 7% of the permitted emission were the actual emissions in Virginia. But they also said for nitrogen dioxide, is meeting the threshold, but the other type of air pollutants like PM 2.5 is not meeting the allowed threshold. Essentially, 7% is the average, and some of the type of air pollutants are actually beyond the allowed threshold. So, and in other states, in Washington State, they said that in 1 year the actual emission was about 12% of the allowed emission. So in our study, we, for the sake of a simple analysis, we just assume 10% across all type of air pollutants. And based on this assumption, the left figure shows the distribution of the health impact across both Virginia and also some other states like Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and New York. So the yellow dots are the location of the other counties of in Virginia where data centers are located, and the yellow dot is the big yellow dot is I think it's the location of Loudoun County, and you can see that it's affecting not only Loudoun County and Fairfax County, but also many other counties in Maryland, in Pennsylvania. So the most affected county is actually Montgomery, which is close to Virginia and also has a lot of population, and is I think also due to the fact that it's just located in the downwind direction of Loudoun County. And then let's come to the scope 2 public health impact across the whole US. So we look at the energy consumption by US data centers from 2019 to 2023 for each state. And then we look at their percentage of the state level data center energy compared to the whole state electricity consumption. And then based on that, we're able to calculate the emission of air pollutants for each state, and then we attribute this state's level energy consumption to different regions because the U.S. is divided into several power balancing regions. That is, for example, if you have a state in Virginia, some data centers in Virginia, the power is not only from Virginia. Some of the power is coming from West Virginia, and later we'll show that impact. And this is the general trend from 2019 to 2023. So you can see on average each year, the annual growth rate is roughly 22% in terms of the public health burden. So it's much faster than the energy increase due to the factors like the population growth, because more population means more health burden. And this is the overall distribution across the whole US at the county level. And you can see that most of the per household health burden, the most affected counties are located in the Midwest and also the along the eastern coast. And the most affected county is Marion in West Virginia. That's because a lot of the coal power plants are just located in West Virginia, in that county, and is supplying energy to data centers in Loudoun, in Fairfax, in Prince William. And all the top 10 counties in terms of the per household health costs are low income counties relative to the national median income level. And roughly 20% of the population took about 50% of the health burden across the whole US. So what about the future? And of course, the future has a lot of uncertainties. And we look at the most recent estimated provided by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They estimate the energy consumption by the US in 2028 will be roughly 6 to 12% of the national electricity consumption. And based on that prediction, and again, using the US EPA COBRA tool, which also provides the prediction for the 2028 baseline emission level, population, and health valuation data set. So that we can show that in 2028, the total public health burden of the US data centers is roughly 10 to 20 billion US dollars. And this increase from 2023 is almost entirely driven by AI computing. For some context, let's look at the on-road emissions of some of the largest US states like California, Florida, and Texas. Because when people talk about the air pollution, the first thing that they often think about is perhaps the vehicles. And due to the tighter regulation, the vehicles emission and health impact is actually decreasing over the years in general across all the most of the states, not all. In 2023, the U.S. data center public health impact is still not matching with the largest on-road emissions in the U.S. states. But in 2028, the public health burden of the U.S. data center could be rivaling or even exceeding that of the on-road emissions of the largest states like Texas and California. So in some sense, we should really change our focus from these vehicles to the booming industry of data centers. And as I said, people don't because of the lack of knowledge, we don't realize that the air pollutants we breathe in are coming from the sources many hundreds of miles away, including those data centers, even though we don't live next to the data centers. So again, why should we focus on data center instead of these other industries? First, it's growing really fast, as shown in the previous slide. And also, more importantly, data centers are very flexible. If you look at those tech companies, they're already exploiting this data center flexibility to reduce their carbon emission. And this flexible loads means we can decide where to build data centers. We can decide when to process the training, and even where to do the training as well. So this flexibility means if you make a decision today, you're gonna be impacting the public health for many years to come, and you can choose the best location to support this AI data center development, and still ensuring clean air and healthy communities. And just as the executive order mentioned, we want to prioritize data center in locations where the total cancer rate from air pollution is not higher than the national average, in order not to further exacerbate those public health burden in those regions. And this is something that we can easily do for data centers. So that comes to the next part, which is basically the solution. We want to use this so-called health-informed AI. We factor in the health signal into the AI data center decisions. So let's just look at a simple case. Suppose we're doing AI model training, and this assuming a model of the scale of Lemma 3.1. So if we look at the Meta's different data center locations in the US, and you can see that the health cost is varying from anywhere between a little more than 0.2 million US dollar to more than 2.5 million US dollars for just do the training in terms of the public health impact. So this is a more than a factor of 10 difference. And if you look at the raw emissions, so this one single model will be equivalent to more than 10,000 round trips by car between LA and New York City. So currently, these data centers are already exploiting this their workload flexibility to reduce the carbon emission. The natural idea is that they're going to be building data centers in places with the more solar, or they're going to be processing as Google said, they will be working harder when the sun shines, or when the wind blows. But if you just focus on the carbon intensity, actually it's not necessarily reducing the health impact. Even though this carbon emission and public health impact share some similar sources like fossil fuels, but they are very different. So this is the data which we analyze based on what time provides the carbon intensity and also health impact data for every 5 minutes across I think 114 regions in the US. So the first figure on the left shows the health price or health cost per unit of energy consumption IQR. IQR stands for interquartile range. So the higher this IQR means, the higher this IQR means, the more spread. It means across different times, how much variation is there in terms of the health cost, and also the we show the carbon IQR as well. So these two comparison, you can see that within the gray area, that's the region where the health changes faster or more widely than carbon. And you can see out of these 114 regions, 110 regions have a faster and wider change of health price than carbon intensity. And the middle figure shows the standard deviation, which gives the same message. Standard deviation is just another metric to measure the spreadness of the distribution. So you can see that out of these 114 regions, 90 of them has a higher standard deviation for health impact than for carbon intensity. And the last figure on the right-hand side shows the spatial distribution of the average health price versus the average carbon intensity. So you can see higher carbon emission doesn't necessarily mean higher health cost, and lower carbon emission could also imply some higher energy cost, higher public health cost. And what's the reason of this observation? This is because carbon intensity doesn't have much dependency on the location of the emission, but health impact depends a lot on the emission source on the emission source location. Think about a case where we are burning some fossil fuels in our backup generators in Death Valley versus in New York City. In Death Valley and New York City, the carbon impact are probably the same. They have similar impact on the long-term climate change because this carbon emission impact is really global. But this health impact in Death Valley is almost nothing, almost zero, because nobody lives in that area. But if you burn the same fossil fuel or backup generators in New York City, the public health impact will be a lot more substantial because of the high population density. So because of this regional impact, we are seeing more variations for this public health impact than carbon intensities. And this means we need to, if you look at this health price and use the health price to drive your decision-making process, you have a huge potential to reduce the health burden without really affecting the public health, without really affecting the carbon emission that much. And this is the figure showing the health-informed AI to balance Meta's data center workloads across the whole US. And we use their 2023 energy consumption for each location as a baseline. And if we also compare with the carbon-aware GLB. So basically, we try to minimize the energy cost plus the carbon emission under different carbon pricing. And zero carbon pricing means we don't really consider carbon. And carbon price equal to infinity per town. That means that we only consider carbon pricing. And you can see that only considering carbon emission compared to the baseline, we are able to reduce the carbon by about 7%. But at the same time, we also increase the health burden by about 2% and energy bill by about 1%. And on the other hand, health-informed GLB means geographic load balancing, because we're really rebalancing the workloads across different data center locations for Meta. So this health-informed GLB can reduce the public health burden by about 25% and energy cost by 3% and even reduce the carbon emission by about 1%. And if you don't really consider the energy cost, only consider the health burden, then you can further reduce the health cost by about 26%. But you also reduce the energy cost, but this reduction is not as much as the algorithm that considers both the health impact and also energy bills. Again, this is due to the mismatch between carbon intensity and also health price. Higher health price doesn't mean a higher carbon emission. And again, similarly, lower carbon emission rate doesn't necessarily mean lower health price. And actually, these two across different locations of matter are not positively correlated. They're negatively correlated. So because of this flexibility, compared to the baseline, we can actually even reduce the air pollution and mitigate the public health burden quite substantially. So in some sense, we are turning these air polluters to air purifiers. And if you sort of co-optimize the power grid management and also data center workloads, we could really even reduce the region-wide air pollutant emission and the overall public health burden. So with that, I'm just concluding my talk. We are talking about this quantifying the public health burden coming from data centers, from their backup generators, and also the electricity usage. And due to the flexibility of data center workloads, we are able to leverage this flexibility to reduce and mitigate the immediate public health impact, and also use this AI data center to improve the public health, and at the same time support the long-term sustainability. So compared to carbon intensity, which doesn't whose pricing depends on different markets. If you're talking about the compulsory market versus the voluntary markets, the carbon price varies by orders of magnitude. And also, if you look at different administrations, the social cost of carbon also varies by many tens of times. So this compared to the carbon pricing, health price is a more robust metric, and also it has a really tangible and immediate impacts on local people's health. I think if we use this health price as a signal to drive our decision making, we can really make a change. And with that, I conclude my talk.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Ren. Um, wow. Uh, I don't know about those of you who live in my neck of the woods, which is the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, but looking at that graph and seeing the health impact costs and how deeply intense the colors where we live is, and I'm in Fairfax County, and I know many people are in Montgomery County, in addition to Loudoun County and Prince George's and DC, this is very sobering, and I think reignites even further than it already was the urgency that we all feel for really encouraging our local leaders to mitigate these health costs. So thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful. Before I get to, I think so far I've counted at least 9 questions that have been added. I am going to pass it over. Let's start with Angie for some Maryland updates, because data centers is something that regulations is something that we have been pushing for, and energy regulations. In both Maryland and Virginia, we really need state regulations in addition to local regulations. We need federal regulations, but I don't think we're there yet. So Nature Forward has been pushing at a state and local level along with many of our partners. And so Angie, would you be able to update us on some of the bills that we are advocating for related to data centers and energy?
Sure thing. Thanks, Lydia, and thank you so much, Dr. Ren. That was very illuminating, and thank you so much also for ending on a little bit of a note of hope of how we can maybe right this ship. Again, I'm Angie McCarthy. I'm the Maryland Conservation Advocate for Nature Forward. And I just put it in the chat as well, in addition to the QR code, but we have had 4 priority bills within Maryland General Assembly. As Lydia said at the top of the call, we are nearly to crossover day, which is the midpoint of General Assembly. So far, I've been able to get my hands dirty with each of these bills. Most pertinently to this talk, the data center study and analysis would echo and build upon the JLARC study that was done in Virginia, which was a data center analysis of the state. And after this, I'll put in the link for those who are interested in learning more about it. So we would like to do that in Maryland to really understand what the landscape is going to look like with data centers. And related to health is Cherish, which is an environmental justice bill that's looking to look at the cumulative harm from big polluters like trash incinerators and other industrial uses, and making sure that those are not zoned and placed right next to communities that already are overburdened with environmental health impacts. ACE is about abundant renewable energy, and that is moving through the different committees at this point. And we're very excited, and that's just supposed to be breaking down barriers to make all sorts of renewable energy more salient in Maryland. If you didn't know, Maryland is a net importer of energy. We actually get 40% of our energy from out of state using dirty materials from West Virginia and Pennsylvania for coal. And then Renew is another making polluters pay bill where we're asking, or not asking, it would require big fossil fuel companies to pay into a fund that would help fund Maryland's resilience in the future. Thank you.
And to many of the members on this call who live in Maryland, please go to the link, scan the QR code, go to natureforward.org and look at the conservation blog. Angie has been sending updates. Sign up for our Action Network to get involved. And I will pass it over to Renee, where we had a lot of data center bills, but maybe the outcomes are not what we hoped for.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. I'm going to stay at a much higher level than we went into in Maryland, but I wanted to do a shout out to 2 of our really strongest partners in Virginia, the Sierra Club and Piedmont Environmental Council. We have just benefited so much from their knowledge sharing, and our friends at Piedmont Environmental Council had tracked 32 data center bills that would have improved Virginia's approach to data center development, and 28 of them failed to progress forward. And those that are progressing have been watered down in a lot of regards. So our General Assembly is over. I should have started with saying that. We ended just this past weekend. We're in a point now where the bills that did move forward, we're waiting for the governor to act on them, to either approve them, veto them, edit them, and approve them. We'll find out. And so we had all of these data center bills not go forward. Last year's answer to the myriad of data center bills that we had was, we'll study it. And they did do a study, the JLARC study in Virginia. And we knew it would be a hard year this year, but we thought maybe we'd make some progress since they studied it. That didn't happen to the same degree that we would have all liked to see. I think in a lot of regards, we were looking at a do no harm approach overall for the General Assembly, data centers included, but beyond that as well. And also to protect some of the good prior legislation that had been passed, not necessarily in terms of data centers, but in that regard, the broader sense, I think we've done a decent job at holding the line in our General Assembly. And so most notably, we've had a win for some invasive plant legislation that's going to the governor. That doesn't have to do with data centers. And so yeah, keep your eyes on the news and we'll see where the few bills that are progressing go. We'll know no later than March 24th.
Thank you, Renee. And I think what Renee shares, and just based on our talk today, I think it really creates an urgency for we need as many people as possible to be educated and to be able to talk to their local leaders, to talk to their friends, their family, on how big of an issue this is. It affects our lands, it affects our water, not just in terms of water pollution, but also consumption, drinking water. How many places have seen drought? It affects our greenhouse gas emissions, worsening climate change, and it also affects our air pollution and our health. This is now Nature Forward's fourth Conservation Cafe talking about data centers and the impacts they have on various topics. You can find them on our natureforward.org page. If you want to educate yourself, because we need as many people involved in this as possible. So with that, I will remind people, because many of you have already been doing this, to add questions to our Q&A. And I will start, Dr. Ren, with some of our questions. We'll start easier. Would you be willing to share some of your slides and maybe link to the paper that was published with our members?
Sure. No problem. Yeah, I'll be happy to share my slides.
All right, thank you. And then the other one is from, I actually am not sure of your name, Zoom user, but they were talking about, and many of us, I'm sure, have also experienced this, where we may talk about the noise pollution, the water usage, the power issues with elected officials, and it hasn't rung true for them. But an issue like quantifying the health impacts is something that is, I think, accessible to every person. Every person cares for their health. Is there a like one pager fact sheet that was created based on the research that you did?
Uh, well, you mean the one page fact sheet about the, so, well, maybe our paper's abstract or the introduction, it's not one page, but 2 to 3 pages. I think
Okay.
it has a summary of the findings. And also, if you go to the US EPA COBRA tool, the COBRA is just designed for local policy makers, state level or a county level policymaker to analyze the health impact of a certain policy.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. And we did have a question from Rob Byron of, do you know if the EPA COBRA tool is still there
Yes.
under the current administration?
That's a great question. So yeah, it is still there. And actually, the tool was first developed in 2001, and it was updated during Trump's first administration, and actually even more updates during his first administration than during the Biden's administration. So I believe it will still be alive because this is something the current EPA also supports, right? The cleaner air, healthier communities.
Thank you. And if for some reason, Rob, it is not there, or if it's wiped in the near future, Harvard worked back in December to download a lot of these different maps, such as EJ Screen, things across the CDC, many different tools across federal websites that could possibly be interpreted as something that does not support this current administration's goals. So that would be a good place as well to look if you are not finding some of these federal tools that many of us have used. Okay, so
Hmm?
Richard or Cap was wondering, besides air quality at data center sites, I believe you spoke to this earlier, Dr. Ren, but did your study evaluate the transmission lines to get power to those sites in terms of air
Uh,
pollution?
we include the power generators because the transmission part, there's, to my knowledge, there's very little pollution if there is any. It should be, I mean, we can just ignore it.
Okay, thank you. And then Natalie was wondering, why is Fairfax County's health cost greater than Loudoun's?
Um, so because we look at the county level total health cost, we're not looking at the per household. Per household wise, Loudoun could be higher than Fairfax, but I believe Fairfax has more higher population than Loudoun County, and also it's to the in the downwind direction of of Loudoun, because so essentially the Loudoun air pollutant will be blowing to Fairfax County, and where more people live.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. Um, Laura wants to know, when considering health impacts, did you look at neurocognitive development in children when it comes to air pollution?
As far as I know, the Cobra 2 doesn't consider the pediatric children's cognitive development in their health outcomes. So they consider asthma, a heart attack, uh, lung cancer, premature death, a set of other, but I don't believe they include the cognitive development for children.
Nicole wants to know, how is this analysis complicated by accounting for different energy sources? So differentiating different pollutant emissions for different data centers, or varying AI models. So for example, maybe many of us have read about DeepSeek and some of the things that were published on that. How does this analysis account for those things?
Yes, we look at the U.S. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs supported by the DOE report. They show us the annual energy consumption from many years ago up to 2023, and also projection of 2028. And also we look at the EPRI report for the statewide energy distribution for data centers. So essentially, we are able to calculate the statewide energy consumption by data centers. And then we also know the emission amount for power generation in each region. And then basically we are able to we already account for the different fuel mixes like coal, natural gas, solar, wind, and nuclear in the region. And then um, based on the fuel mix for each region, and also how much energy is attributed or is supplied to data centers, then we calculate the emission attributable to data center, and then based on the Cobra will give you the final results. And I should also point out that we are using a method called average attribution. So if you look at something called marginal attribution, essentially that means if you are trying to build a new data center, what will be the added emission? That's something which we can do as well, and that's you need to use another tool called AVERT, which is also provided by the EPA. So AVERT and Cobra can be used together to analyze the projects of added emission due to some new data centers. And actually, the US EPA provides the health price for added load. So essentially, if you want to just get a ballpark estimate, look at the energy load, energy consumption for, say, a data center uses, say, 10 megawatt and multiply by the number of hours a year, you get the energy consumption, multiply by the regional health price provided by the US EPA. You get a reasonable estimate of the overall health impact added by the data center.
So I'm gonna throw another word problem just based on the fact that we're talking about Cobra and carbon burden. Tamala shared that her township is looking to install a 3 megawatt data center in South Central Pennsylvania, which is 20 miles from Harrisburg. So if she wanted to use Cobra to help, could she use Cobra as it is to calculate the health and carbon burden based on what you've shared?
Yes, it's very simple. So maybe I can just give a quick overview by sharing my screen by using
Yeah.
Cobra. It's because it's really quick. And webs, I mean, they also provided the download desktop version, which has more functionalities, but a web page is easier to use. And also the functionalities are good enough for many simple analysis. For example, let's look at Pennsylvania. Which county? Harrisburg?
It's about 20 miles from Harrisburg. That's
Yeah, let's
correct.
just assume it's Harrisburg. H. Oh, I don't know the county, but let's say Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, just and then you
She just added it. It's Cumberland County.
com yeah, Cumberland. Okay, and then let's choose the electric utility, and we don't have to choose subsector. Well, we don't know we need to calculate so the energy is 300 megawatts, and you multiply by number of hours. That's you can get a sense of the total amount of energy by that data center, and then we look at the whole region. Let's say for the whole region, I think oh no, compared to the okay, I think it's more than that. So anyway, I think it's more than that. So just assume that all the power is coming just from Pennsylvania, right? But actually, it's coming from other states as well, like West Virginia. But that requires some very simple additional analysis. But I'll skip that part. Suppose all the power is coming from Pennsylvania, and let's assume 1% of the energy of Pennsylvania is for that new data center, which is a very simple assumption. And then you just enter this. You can also enter the raw amount if you know that. And then click run. And then about 1 minute, it will give you the result.
Okay, thank you. While we're waiting for that to calculate, Brittany wants to know, why would data centers uh, and AI be resistant to health-informed AI practices?
Uh, well, they're not resistant. Because this is something new. They don't. If you look at their sustainability reports, they focus on carbon. They report water and energy, but they are not talking about these criteria air pollutants at all, like PM 2.5, nitrogen dioxide. It's not something It's not like they don't know it. They have that information. They just, for some reason, they choose not to report that information in the public domain, and so I think. If they don't look at this issue just appears to be not existing. And then, of course, there's no such thing called a health informed AI. And we want to bring up the awareness and to let them know that there is a health impact, which you need to take into account. And also you have this flexibility to reduce it substantially without really affecting your climate goals. So I think this is something they should definitely consider. And you can see the result is for very detailed results, and also for each county level, you can look at the the information it's just designed. They also have some tutorials. It's on YouTube. So I think you can just use it to apply the analysis for your data center projects.
Thank you. We
You can
have
see
not just gotten a well-informed research paper evaluation. We've just learned how to use a new tool to inform our advocacy. So
yeah,
you've been very generous.
it's enabling state, local, tribal government staff and others interested in the effects of air pollution to estimate their health impact. So, yeah.
Can you review one more time? You talked about different flexibility, how siting data centers in places that may not be have as much population density can help to reduce that health burden. Are there any specific policy recommendations that those of us who are talking to our local leaders should really be pushing for?
Okay. So our research is really quantifying this health impact and to inform the decision making. If you just like when you build any project, you need to you look at the cost and you also look at the benefit, right? So this is part of the cost the whole society is paying, and then eventually leaves up to the policymaker to decide what to do. I think as at least for myself as a researcher, we just provide this data, and then that's then what would be the next step. I'm not really familiar with how the policy works.
Thank you. Since we're on your slides, Jim was wondering if we can go back to the health-informed AI slide for that you had up for Virginia and Maryland. And can we spend a little more time on what that means for those of us who live in Virginia and Maryland who are seeing a lot of these health costs? You talked some about Fairfax County. You talked some about Montgomery County. Uh,
So, yeah, this is so if you, even though this most affected county is Montgomery, but mostly due to the higher population. So if you look at the per household wise, I think, just divide this number by the number of households in each county, you can get a per household value. And then still, where data centers are located, I think they should have the highest health burden per household wise. And this can provide, I mean, the total provides one message, the per household wise also provides another important message. And yeah, if you choose, if you want to know, say, the street level, then Cobra is not designed for that. We need additional analysis to see what if I build a data center across this street or in that neighborhood, how that will be affecting my house or my neighborhood's health impact. That's the Cobra doesn't give you that information. It's only give you the county level data.
Thank you. And then would you be able to speak in a little more detail on the types of illnesses and the degree to which those illnesses increase based on data centers and AI burden?
So that's a good question. So the most direct type of disease is asthma symptoms. So essentially like wheezing or coughing and shortness of breath, and also heart attack. So premature death as well. So in 2028, if you look at the high estimate by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, this blue line represents about 600,000 asthma symptom cases and about 1,000, more than 1,000 premature death. And this is not saying that this person died immediately because of the air pollution. Because when people, I mean, there's no such death cause of air pollution. It's an attribution analysis. If you look at WHO, they say 8 million people died of air pollution, ambient, not non-ambient, overall air pollution each year. Then this is attribute the deaths to these different causes, and air pollution is just one of the causes, and they have some methodology to attribute what is the contribution of the air pollution to the deaths. And this 1,000 deaths is not like, oh, we're seeing 1,000 people die just because of the air pollution. It's not like that. I think it's just a special way to, it's a scientific way to attribute the overall deaths to certain causes. Yeah.
Thank you. Nicole brings up a bit of a quandary for you. With the proposed approach, in terms of siting data centers in areas that are that have less population density. We have seen in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, for example, Loudoun County is less urbanized than Fairfax County or Montgomery County. And so we saw a lot of data centers built up there, and it's completely changed the landscape. We saw this as well in Frederick, Maryland, where a lot of data center hyperscale campuses were being proposed and built out in rural areas. So how do you balance? And I don't know if this is a question as a researcher that you can answer, because this might get more into policy. But how do you balance citing for public health burden without harming rural communities as well?
I think so total public health burden is not only from the backup generators. Yeah, if you only look at the backup generators, less population will be better place for building data centers. But if you factor in the scope two, which is the electricity consumption health impact, a lot of the energy for data centers in Virginia is coming from West Virginia. So in that sense, whether we are building data centers in Loudoun or in other counties is probably not much different because anyway, the energy is coming from West Virginia, like Marion County in West Virginia. So I think just depends on your focus. If you only focus on a local impact, and then you look at the backup generators, and this is the health dollar cost, and you're gonna be weighing the benefit, and then look at the cost, and then make a decision. So yeah, I think again, how they make a decision, how much they weigh this health burden, that's up to the policymaker. But I think this is what the science is telling us.
Thank you. And then let's see. Anne Bennett from Virginia Sierra Club uh, wanted to know, they have generally considered Meta to be one of the better data center operators in terms of using more solar, having their data centers focus more on high efficiency. And she was wondering if your research looked at Amazon at all, as it has by far the largest footprint and impact in the state of Virginia and will be adding dozens of hyperscale data centers.
Uh, no, not yet. So we look at three individual companies, but not including Amazon, because Amazon doesn't really show us their overall energy consumption or their specific locations. The reason is Amazon leases a lot of locations from co-location providers. And yeah, they just comparatively, they are less transparent compared to other tech companies. So we are not including their analysis in our research.
So everyone draw from that what you will. We need transparency in policy as well, so we can calculate Amazon into these important things. To build on considering less populated sites, Dave wants to know, is it realistic to expect businesses to site data centers in remote areas where the population density is lower, recognizing the enormous differences in costs that it would involve to provide electric service there? What would it take to require them to locate these centers in remote areas?
Well, again, I think if you only look at the on-site scope one health impact, then less population will be useful. But if you factor in the electricity part, then it's more complicated and not necessarily a remote area is the best location. In I would say LA, Los Angeles has even less cost overall than a rural area in Virginia because California energy is really much cleaner than the Mid Atlantic region. So again, I think yeah, this health impact is just one part of the cost, and we also have the other type of cost, like what you mentioned, this the additional infrastructure, power lines, transmission lines. Those are the costs that may potentially be paid by the other residents as well. So we need to factor in those costs as well, and then look at the total cost versus the total benefit. And health is just one part of the equation.
Thank you. And I know you've done some research as well on some of the other impacts of data centers. You talked a lot about water in this presentation. And so a very cryptic attendee called Anonymous would like to know if data centers could reduce water consumption by recycling the water, like a car radiator. And do any of them do this, or, is it reasonable to expect this? Is it possible?
That's a great question. So, um, it is possible. That's actually called just dry cooler. But the downside is you basically there's no opening at the top. It's just a purely closed loop. In this case, to dissipate the heat, we require more energy consumption because the water evaporation, that's a natural way to remove the heat. Human body, we don't require electricity, but we still get cooler if we sweat. And this dry cooler generally consume more energy, and that's acknowledged by both Google and Microsoft and other tech companies. And so that means dry cooler will be consuming more electricity and also more carbon emission. And overall, you could be using more water offsite than even though you are not using much water on site. So it's a balance. And if you're really talking about those water stressed areas, and dry cooler could be an option, especially your electricity coming from other states that are not water stressed. So it's an option, but it's not necessarily the most water efficient way if you consider the overall water impact on the local water resources.
Thank you. Now, related to health and other impacts, a few people were wondering if your research took into account noise pollution in relation to health impacts.
Uh, I've 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 heard of quite a few complaints about the data center noise pollution, especially in Northern Virginia. And I know there's some connection between, people cannot sleep well because of the noise, high-pitched noise, and then there could be other health outcomes associated with the noise pollution. But I myself haven't really done any research in that space.
Okay, thank you. All right. A question from Julie from Piedmont Environmental Council. How would you recommend using Cobra to estimate Dominion's planned doubling of the grid for data centers just to get an idea of potential air pollution?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what the Cobra is designed for. So just go to Cobra and look at where the power plants will be added, and then just assuming you just double the power production, and then you multiply, basically you increase the emission amount in that region, in that county by 100%, and you see the impact. And I think, yeah, this is just Cobra is designed for this wide area analysis, even though it's a screening tool, but it's very valuable. And the DOE and hundreds of research papers use that tool for this health burden analysis. And I know there was not only DOE, last year there was a study published in PNAS, it's Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences here. Yeah, in the middle. It's analyzing the US EV health burden, health impact in the middle. So it's they use a Cobra. So I think, yeah, Cobra is very ideal for analyzing the impact of addition of another power plant in a certain region.
Thank you. Jack wants to know what you think the future of the energy drain of AI is. Do we think like some advances will reduce the need of such power, kind of like the way we've seen cars or phones advance and evolve?
Yeah, I think per model wise or per task wise, per request wise, yes, we're going to see this improvement, just like DeepSeek, right? So they're not using those big models, they're using much smaller model, and they're delivering similar performances. And I think we'll be seeing continuous improvement in the energy efficiency per task, per request. But overall demand, that's little bit harder to know because at one time you're reducing the resource consumption per task, but there could be increased demand. And this is called rebounding effect or the Javan's paradox. So the overall energy consumption could be even higher than otherwise. So I think that's yeah. So we will see more improvement in the efficiency, but we'll likely see more demand as well.
Thank you. And you get a break for a little bit, and I'm gonna pop it over to Renee. Renee, would you be able to explain for for the people joining us who are not in Virginia, when Dr. Ren or you talk about JLARC, what do we mean?
That's a great question. Acronyms in the government are such a fun thing, and if you don't know, it's almost impossible to follow along. JLARC stands for Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, and the purview of this organization is to conduct program evaluation, policy analysis, and oversight of state agencies on behalf of the Virginia General Assembly. So whatever the General Assembly might need more information on, the legislators can say, JLARC, can you initiate a study about this to help inform what we might do in the future? And so this study was done over the past year on data centers. So like we said, a lot of these bills that were introduced in last year's General Assembly kind of got sent to JLARC to be studied before any action was taken on them. And so the link was dropped in the chat box for the report, and it's really helpful to look over and review. They did a pretty good analysis for the time that they had. I think we take exception to some of the information that's in there. It might have been phrased in different ways than we might have done. But on a whole, it's a really helpful guide about the kinds of things that we're looking at. And a lot of the information is kind of reporting on what is today. But like we've talked about a little bit here and also in the previous presentations, this industry is changing so fast and growing so fast that it's really hard to project completely what's happening in the future. And so some of that is harder to get to in the JLARC study than we might have wanted. And so what they did in this study is kind of summarize things, but also put together a list of recommendations that the commission gave back to the General Assembly, as well as so general recommendations and also policy recommendations. So I definitely recommend anybody go check it out again. Thank you, Angie, for putting the link in the chat box, just to kind of get familiar with some of these things. And it was really helpful because there were some good call outs, like places in Fairfax are really densely developed, and we are one of the locales that might suffer the greatest kinds of impacts to residents with locations of data centers versus a more land expansive area like Loudoun or Prince William County, which is not to say that there are not land impacts and residence impacts. There are, obviously, but each of these locales juggles different things. So definitely go check out the study. It's pretty easy to skim as well.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you, Dr. Ren. And I want to lift up to everyone something that Brittany Keys shared. She's from Wisconsin and shared that developers have to report the air pollution to state regulators for air permitting of their diesel generators, but they don't fully analyze the health impacts of the generation sources. And she and her partners have brought it up to Microsoft and to their state agencies, and there haven't been changes. And Brittany, you're not alone. Nature Forward and many of our partners has felt this frustration. We don't have diesel generator requirements in Virginia. In Maryland, we actually relaxed our laws back in 2024 to make an exception for diesel generators for data centers. So I cannot emphasize now more than ever, it is so important that we all take this amazing information that Dr. Ren has shared and work together to push at every level, because a victory in one state and locality, I can tell you that, you know, we saw some progress in Ohio, and those of us over here in Virginia and Maryland and DC, we're all talking about ratepayer protection. I do want to close with a few last words and announcements before we sign off for the evening. Um, we have, and I'm sorry for those of you who are not in the area that are on this call, we have another conservation cafe coming up in May called the Shell Crack, the Transformative Power of Nature. And this is hosted by our Maryland conservation advocate. Angie, do you want to talk for like a minute about what's it going to be about?
Yeah, for sure. So, in May, we are going to be joined by three queer environmentalists who are going to be talking about how nature allowed them to live their most authentic lives, and talking a little bit about their career paths as well. It's going to be a very interactive day. We are going to forage around Wood End and potentially make a tea. We're going to do some grounding activities. We're going to look at the stars and realize that we are all just little animals on this big blue planet.
You. Denise, next slide. So we hope to have you join us May 8th. Uh, and then as part of the follow-up, we'd love for you to tell us how we did and provide feedback on the Conservation Cafe. And let us know what you want to learn about in future cafes as well as part of this survey. We do take those things into account when we're planning. And then also, if you have it, I know this month, last month has brought so many changes and fears for many of us, and so much of the work that we do to protect the earth and protect those of us who live on the earth. But if you have capacity, please consider donating. These conservation cafes we used to charge, but we have just seen how much of a need there is, especially around data centers, to educate people. This is a really, really, really big issue that affects our land, our biodiversity, our public transit. You know, it's so intersectional. If you have a pet project, I can probably tell you how data centers affect it. So please consider giving to the work that Nature Forward is doing to educate people on data centers. And then you can look for past and upcoming conservation cafes. I mentioned earlier, we actually have 3 other conservation cafes that focus on different issues of data centers. Data Centers 101, which was hosted by one of your members or one of the people here, Ann Bennett, from Sierra Club. We have one on how data centers affect parks and water and trees and the land. And we just had another one in January on how we're moving at the state and what are some state policies that are recommended from Julie from Piedmont Environmental Council. So you can find them at this final link. Next slide, Denise. And then finally, this can apply to everyone, no matter where you are or who you are. We have our Taking Nature Black conference coming up March 5th through 8th. It is a hybrid conference. It's accessible, completely virtual. Even our nature immersive experiences are all accessible virtually. But if you're in the area, we have in-person day on March 7th and nature experiences on March 8th. This was really about looking at all the intersection of the environment, celebrating the Black community's engagement with nature and how we engage with nature, but also finding joy and finding space to recharge and be together. We have music and spoken word and so many great talks and speakers lined up. So please consider joining us. And if cost is an issue, please reach out to us at Nature Forward, because we can always figure out a way to be able to include you with discount codes should cost be an issue. So with that, is there anything else, Denise? Thank you for coming. It is 8:31. We're so thankful to include you. Look out for the recording of this presentation to be sent in the next week, along with Dr. Ren's slides and a link to the paper that he and several of his colleagues published. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you at the next Conservation Cafe in May and at Taking Nature Black. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.